So personally, I feel pretty happy with the amount of draft coverage that I have been able to give across this draft period and off-season for the AFL, but I still think there are some clubs that I haven't really spoken about enough. So, to finish off the preview style before we get to the mock draft and then the live streams, I thought, let's go through these four clubs relatively quickly, give my thoughts, and go from there, because we've talked about Richmond to death. I've done a full video on North. We know what's going to happen with the majority of academy kids, especially early in the draft, father-sons, all those kinds of things. There's still some clubs left, though. And no, this isn't Vic bias. This is just, I got there eventually. Before you comment that someone in Victoria didn't talk about an interstate team for 30 seconds, and that means that it's Vic bias. Let's do this. The Giants have got 3 picks before pick 22 arrives, which is more than handy, and with one of those later picks, they will match a bid for Academy Ruckman Logan Smith, so we can almost book that in. But it's what they do with their 3 picks in the 21. That is really interesting. I do think they are going to land one of Joe Berry or Taj Houghton. I don't think they're going to go for both in the slightest, but I think that player forward of the ball is still going to be something that they target. I'm interested that in Cal Toomey's phantom draft that he had Jonty Fall as someone the Giants were putting time into. I find that curious considering they've already got Wade Dirksen, Maxi G, Aaron Cadman, Jake Riccardi to partner. With Jesse Hogan, Callum Brown is on that list as well. So what's kind of interesting for mine is that this guy, Jonty, who is going to be a forward, is still being spoken about. Now, for mine, I think there is enough key forward depth that if you do want to go down that path, that's what your later pick could be for. It looks like Harrison Oliver is going to be high up on their list as well, who I could see them taking at 21. Now, ideally for them, someone like a Xavier Lindsay. It's interesting that they turned down pick 3 for their 2 consecutive picks, so they are definitely going to have some players in mind. Who that second one on the back-to-back is going to be, it's going to be relatively interesting. I still think Job Shanahan is a chance, because if they're interested in Jonty Fall, I don't see why they wouldn't be interested in Job Shanahan as an athletic forward type. I'm really pumped to see what they do. I do think they could also go down the midfielder path, because you do have the aging Josh Kelly and Stephen Canelio there, so that would be really interesting. And if you wanted to throw someone who's maybe a smoky out there, maybe a Cooper Hines could be someone that they target as well, but we can almost certainly lock in Logan Smith. I think you can almost lock in a small forward of some kind, whether it's the high half forward in Houghton or the one further closer to goal in Joe Berry, and a little bit of a wild card spot, to be perfectly honest, but they'll want good ball users, pressure players, and I'm not sure they're going to go with more than 2 talls out of their picks. Logan Smith and one other tall at most. Port Adelaide are really interesting, obviously with the loss of Dan Houston, but the acquisitions of Jack Lukosius especially is going to help them forward of the ball. They still are in the market, in my opinion, for a tall forward, so Jonty Fall is someone that they could look at, but pick 29 is going to be super interesting, because are they going to take a reach on either a James Barrett or a Harry O'Farrell if they decide that a key defender is going to be the way to go? Is there a way that they're going to be able to trade up to potentially target a Matt Whitlock, who I think would be a perfect fit in this side? What they do early, I think they're definitely going to go after either a tall forward or Toby Travalia if he works there, because they've already lost Houston. Kane Farrell's going to be a free agent at the end of the year, the most underrated free agent in my opinion. So Port are going to be in a really interesting spot. They also turned down priority access to their 4 father-son selections, so 2 Burgoynes, one from Sean, one from Peter in Kai and Rome, I think it is, or Rome, but I think it's Rome. You've got Brent Montgomery's boy, and you've got Josh Franco's boy as well, who, look, one of them could end up at Port, a couple of them could, but they haven't got priority access. Definitely keeping their options open, which I think is the right idea, but I think they definitely need to go after a rebounding kind of player. If Harrison Oliver did end up at that pick 29, that would be ideal, but at worst, they need to either get a centre-half back or a centre-half forward, and as best of ball users as they can, and they certainly don't need a midfielder. Really don't think they need a midfielder at all. But they did the deal for Houston, and they've got to get something out of it now, and I think they will, because the top end of the draft is relatively even. But it's going to be really interesting to see where Port end up, because they're not that close to a flag, but they were in a prelim. I know 18-year-olds aren't going to make you win a flag, but you are going to lay the platform now for Rosie, Butters, and these guys as they hit their prime to have a young core underneath them. And it started in the last couple of drafts, and we'll see how they go at the back end of their draft. But they are fascinating for mine. Not too many teams aren't, but Port are happily sneaking under the radar, I think, in terms of teams of curiosity. Sydney did stuff all in the trade period, the same as 2022, which they got smacked in a grand final then, they got smacked in a grand final this year, and then what happens? They took a step backwards in 2023. Will they do the same? I'm not sure. We can almost lock in Joel Cochran in that back line, so that maybe takes out the need for a Matt Whitlock in that case. I definitely think Jack is someone that they are going to go after. If Taj Houghton does slip through the cracks there, I think he is one they could definitely look at. He does seem like the kind of player the Swans could just stash away, even if Chad Warner is going to be on the move, and I'm actually more against that move than for it, or I'm probably predicting he stays rather than goes, I should say. I still don't think they're going to go for a midfielder. They've got pretty good midfield depth at the Swans. Yes, you don't just have another Chad Warner lying in wait, but you do have guys, Angus Sheldrick, front of mind, Caden Cleary as he comes through, would also be one to look at that are going to get midfield time, so I don't think they're going to use one of their early picks there. I think the other underrated one for the Swans might be a Luke Trainer. Nick Blakey got pretty exposed throughout the final series as a one-on-one player, and if you want to turn him into top echelon rebounding defender in the league and not have him get exposed as a front or back shoulder defender, Luke Trainer might be the answer to their problems there. If they could land Jack Whitlock and Luke Trainer in their first 2 picks of the draft, or even if they could add Taj Houghton at the expense of one of those players, I would probably go with Jack Whitlock and Taj Houghton as your 1-2 punch. If they're both available, I would probably go with Taj first, given that you do have some depth in the key position spots at that second pick. Taj, he would have been a top 10 pick in this draft if he didn't do his ACL. There's no real evidence to suggest that he would come back a awful player off that ACL, so we'll see how that goes. But the Swans, they've obviously got their 2 picks. They've got Joel Cochran, so I'm looking forward to seeing what they do as well. And then finally, the Bulldogs, and small forward is definitely what they're going to need to get. Charlie Clark didn't work out. They need help in the small forward department because there's only so many Latham Vandermeers and Robbie McNeils and these kind of guys that you can afford to play. Ollie Hannaford was going to be kind of their stash guy before the Bulldogs realised that so many other clubs were looking at him as well. So Joe Berry and Ollie Hannaford are going to be the guys that they look at. Jasper Alger is going to be a guy that they're going to look at later on in the draft as well as a small forward player, which is really interesting. The Bulldogs have been linked to Cooper Hines as well, and I definitely think he and Riley Sanders tandem in a post-Tom Liberatore and Adam Treloar world, which of course isn't going to be next year, but is coming quickly. That would also help the Bulldogs, but they definitely need X-factor players. They cannot afford to go after the boring, dependable types. They need some punch and some firepower, especially forward of the ball. Going to be interested to see if they target, say, a Harry O'Farrell or someone like that down back. Yes, they've got Jed Buslinger, who they won't play, and I know they've got some depth in that department. But considering Sam Darcy has shown he is going to be either a ruckman or a forward, probably more forward than ruck, considering Tim English signed that extension throughout the year, I still think they're a good key defender short, and given that this draft has got quite a few of them, that could be an area they target as well, and you never know, someone like a Harry O'Farrell, James Barrett, these kinds of guys could really work in tandem with each other, and could also work really well with Jed Buslinger moving forward. So, yeah, I can definitely see a Cooper Hines, Ollie Hannaford, and then a tall defender kind of play. And then later on in the draft, the Bulldogs do like going after the guys that aren't really being spoken about enough. I made the mistake of underestimating Joel Freyer coming into last year's draft. I won't let it happen again. Maybe a guy like Zach Johnson from the Northern Knights may be someone to consider, or Cody Anderson if he does slip past the Hawks there at 33 would be one to look at, as well as an inside mid who does model his game after Tom Liberatore. So those are the 4 clubs, guys, that I feel like didn't really get a lot of coverage on the channel before the draft, so I thought I would amend that right now. I hope you are having a fantastic week. On Friday night, the new Daz Talks horror video comes out where I talk about a movie that I absolutely hate, and I'm pretty sure everyone else does as well, but I don't hate it for the same reasons. So go check out Daz Talks Horror. The link to that is in the description. Go and subscribe. Nearly at 100 subscribers. I really appreciate everyone that has watched those videos and has kept up to date with the draft content as well, I should say. You should also check out my previous video, which is about the Whitlock brothers, if you want a little bit of a dissection on those two. I really like what I did in that video. Hopefully you do as well. Look after yourselves. Look after each other. I will see you in the next video. You absolute superstars. See ya.